I haven't been in 40K for very long, a little under 6 months, but for years there's been a single model that's kind of been hiding in the shadows and poking me every once in a while saying, hey, you should really get in 40K because if you do that, you can buy a bunch of me. And that is the Astra Militarum Sentinel. It was one impulsive trip to a hobby shop that resulted in me just going all into 40K, and this model is largely responsible for that. Now, I don't know the meta. I just bought a bunch of models and I slapped them on the table and I'm like, yeah, cool, I've got an army. But the Sentinel, I love how diverse it is. Just how much you can do with it, from the scout to the armor and all the different weapon variations it can carry. I'm in love with this unit. But like many, I want to get the most out of the Sentinel as I can, and that is where magnetization comes in. In this video, I just want to go through how I magnetize my Sentinels in a way that doesn't just let you change the weapons, remove the chainsaw or the hunter killer missile, but also lets you change what type of Sentinel you're running, scout or armored, but even facilitate packing it in tight spaces better. I know the first Sentinel I assembled without magnetization, trying to fit it in my Citadel carrying case over there, it just, oof, I was afraid that thing was going to collapse. So for this video, I just want to go over how it is that I magnetize my Sentinels. Two things before I start, though. First, I make mistakes, and because there's no undo button when you're assembling minis, all those mistakes are staying in the video. This is going to be a good opportunity to kind of improve the process and learn, because no matter how many times you've done something, you can always improve it further, be more efficient, or maybe you discover a new technique that just works a little better. I recommend you watch the entire video all the way through before starting this. Second, I'll have a write-up of this guide on my website, which you'll find a link in the description of this video to. It will already have those corrections and improvements as part of the text, so you won't have to be scrolling up and down. And I find these write-ups extremely helpful for those that don't want to be constantly pausing and playing in a video. So don't even feel obligated to watch this video. You can just go straight to that write-up right now. This intro is more than long enough, so let's go ahead and go into the materials you'll need in order to magnetize your Sentinel fully. First, let's go over the obvious requirements of any model build. The assembly instructions. While this is useful to have for reference, they are less useful for our purposes. The sprues. Plastic glue, of which I'm a big fan of the Citadel bottle. Plastic cutters. Again, I prefer Citadel. A hobby knife, which I also use for cleaning mold lines. Tweezers, though you'll need plastic if you want to use them for working with the magnets. And a filing set. Additional materials and tools we'll need for magnetizing specifically include CA glue, or a similar glue capable of bonding smooth metal to plastic, a hobby drill, along with a 2mm and a 3mm bit, a hobby saw kit, and the magnets themselves, of which we need at least 2 5mm discs, 8 3mm discs, and 18 2mm discs. The magnets I'm using are 0.8 millimeters thick, and you don't want to go much thicker than that. Now, before we even take a look at the manual, we're going to want to take the upper of the 2 pelvis pieces, take that out of the sprue, and we're going to use our hobby knife in order to remove the nub. This is going to create an opening that we're going to use to add a 5mm magnet to the pelvis that will attach it to the torso. Make sure to give that opening a good cleanup using your hobby knife and a file before we move on. Now we can go ahead and remove the lower portion of the pelvis from the sprue. And while we're there, let's go ahead and cut just a very small portion of sprue material off as well. About 1/2 centimeter is good. We're going to use this material as a platform for our magnet to make sure that it's flush with the upper portion of the pelvis. The sprue as it is a little thicker than what we need, so we're going to take our hobby knife and cut off about half the height of that sprue. Next, we're going to attach that sprue to the lower pelvis, gluing the narrow side of the sprue face down. Next, go ahead and grab the upper portion of the pelvis and do a little test fit. We're going to take 2 of the 5mm magnets and put them into place. We're looking for the lower of the 2 magnets to be flush with the top of the pelvis. If you're not satisfied with how the magnets line up, remove a little more of the material with a file. Once you are satisfied, go ahead and seal that pelvis up with some plastic glue. As this isn't the first Sentinel that I've magnetized, I'm going to compare the orientation of my 5mm magnets to that of a previously magnetized set of legs. Once I'm happy with the orientation, I apply a little bit of CA glue to the bottom magnet and then add it to the pelvis. Give that glue about a minute to dry and then you'll be able to take it off cleanly. Next we're going to magnetize the base of the torso, so go ahead and find that base piece and remove it from the sprue. First we're going to take our saw and cut off the cone that the chainsaw attaches to. Use your hobby knife and a file to clean this spot up. Next we'll attach the 5mm magnet. Grab your pelvis piece and attach the second magnet to it. Place some CA glue into the socket and then just press the 2 pieces together, holding it for about 30 seconds to let the glue settle. Next we'll add a magnet where the chainsaw attaches. I find it easiest to just check the orientation using an entire stack and applying glue to the last magnet in that stack. Just press and hold and give it about 30 seconds to dry. Prep the chainsaw and then using another stack of magnets in the correct orientation as always, add glue to the last magnet in the stack and just stick it in the hole. You're going to end up with an extra magnet inside the chainsaw, so just use 2 additional stacks, 1 pushing and 1 pulling to remove that additional magnet. From here we're going to need to get the legs assembled before any more magnetization is required, so let's go ahead and get that done. With the legs assembled, let's combine our pieces and take a moment to appreciate how much we've done. Even this early into the process, you can really see how the project is starting to come together, and those 5mm magnets really do a good job of holding those legs onto the base. Next, let's go ahead and get the torso hard points magnetized. Remove the right side of the torso, which is where the hard points are found. Be sure not to remove the rod that's part of the roll cage, as we'll need that later when we're doing the scout canopy. We're going to use a 3mm drill bit to widen the weapon socket. Be gentle here, as since there's already a hole, the drill is going to work quicker than what we're expecting. Go ahead and clean up that hole. Now use a 2mm drill bit to drill a hole into what I call the accessory socket. This is the square socket where weapon accessories are going to be attached. Once both holes are drilled, go ahead and glue in the magnets. It's in our best interest here to make sure that both the 3mm magnet and the 1.6mm magnet share their orientation. If you get an excess magnet stuck into the accessory slot, just use a pair of metal tweezers to remove it. Next, let's tackle the pilot, which we need to magnetize because it won't fit inside the Sentinel when you're using the Armored canopy. Assemble the pilot as you normally would, but don't glue them down into their seat. Drill a 2mm wide hole into the center of the backrest. Then drill a 2mm wide hole into the back of the pilot where the 2 recess lines cross. This lines up almost perfectly with the center of that backrest. Put a 1.6mm magnet into each of the holes we just made. Once the glue is dried, just make sure the pilot is nice and comfortable in his seat. From here we're going to finish assembling the pilot, as well as attaching the sides of the torso to the base of the torso. We'll also put the engine block on before continuing magnetization. With the torso assembled, we can now prep it for the canopies. Drill 2mm holes in the back corners of the cockpit. You can use the roll cage of the scout canopy to figure out where they need to go. Put a 1.6mm magnet into each of these holes. Next, we'll drill a 3mm hole into the center of that cockpit's rear wall. You'll see that I drilled a 2mm hole here using a 1.6mm magnet, and while that will work, it's not ideal, and I really recommend the 3mm magnet here. Now we'll work on the first of the 3 canopies, the standard scout canopy. This is essentially just a roll cage, which, being made of plastic, makes it the most delicate piece to work with. Apply glue to the rods that are still attached to the torso. You did leave those attached, right? Now set the roll cage into place and give it plenty of time to cure. It might be helpful to reinforce this bond after the plastic glue is cured with a little CA glue, or even a little bit of green stuff. Once we're sure the glue has had its time to work, we're going to use a hobby knife to cut the rods from the torso. We want to be very delicate here. Too much pressure and we're going to break those bonds that we just made. Once the roll cage is removed, we're going to snip off just a little bit of material from these back rods, about as much as your magnets are thick. The easiest way to glue the magnets to the roll cage is to attach them to the torso and just apply a little glue to the top of them. Then take the roll cage and just set it into place. Once the glue's had a chance to dry, it's not a bad idea to reinforce it with a little more CA glue or once again a little bit of green stuff. Now we can take the scout canopy and set it aside. For the second canopy, which I refer to as the Pseudo-Armored Scout Canopy, follow steps 3H through 3K in the manual, but do not attach the canopy to the torso. On the underside of the canopy frame, drill 3mm hole in the center of the bar. Attach a 3mm magnet to the magnet in the center of the torso, and add a spot of glue. Set the canopy into place, making sure the magnet slots into the hole, and let the glue set. When the glue is dry, remove the canopy and set it to the side. If you need to, now's a good time to clean up some of that excess glue. Now let's go ahead and give that a little test fit, and that seems to fit pretty nice. Give it a little shake test. It's a little wobbly, but honestly, as long as your Sentinel is standing up right, that's not going to be too much of a problem. You can use a bigger magnet here if it is a concern to you. It was at this point that I realized that the pseudo-armored canopy didn't quite fit when the pilot was in place. It was easy enough to fix by using the hobby knife to remove just a little bit of material. With that material removed, the canopy fits. For the armored canopy, we're going to have to get creative since we've already used the canopy frame. Remove all the pieces indicated in steps 7B through 7E of the manual. Take the roof piece and glue the faceplate to it, making sure to preserve a ledge around the exterior. Glue on the sides, letting the first settle before fully attempting to add the second side. As with the faceplates, there should be a ledge around the exterior of the roof. You'll notice that because we aren't using the frame, there is no backplate to this canopy. We can fill this in using green stuff, or you can just take a bit of material from the sprue. Since I don't have much experience with green stuff yet, I opted for the sprue material. I cut it to length, and then ensured one side was cut at an angle. After a test fit, I cut a little more material off, and then it was time to glue it into place. You want to be a little delicate here since we don't have any support structure. It's really easy to pinch the canopy and warp its shape. I did this and only found out later. It resulted in me having to do a little bit of repair. Once we have a back plate, we're going to drill a 3mm hole in the center of the underside. If there isn't enough material, you can use a 2mm hole. Now, like we did with the pseudo-armored canopy, place a magnet onto the torso, add a little bit of glue to it, and set the canopy into place. Once again, when the glue is dry, remove the canopy and set it to the side. The hunter-killer missile is where I probably made the most mistakes, and they had nothing to do with magnetizing the missile to the rail. First, I glued the rail onto the body prior to drilling the hole for the magnet. This caused me to push the rail out of alignment while I was drilling the hole, and I ended up having to clean the rail before re-gluing it. I also made the mistake of putting the rail too far forward. This caused the fins of the missiles to interfere with the canopies when they were attached. So for the second time, I had to remove the rail and reattach it. To magnetize the hunter-killer missile correctly, get the rail and the missile. Drill a 2mm hole just behind the front notch on the rail. On the missile, drill a 2mm hole just behind the front slot. Take two of our 1.6mm magnets and glue one into the rail. Add a little glue to the other side, and just set your missile into place. Once the glue's dried, you should be able to just remove the missile. If you used a little too much glue, you may need to use your hobby knife to separate them. With the missile magnetized to the rail, we can now glue the rail onto the body. Just make sure the front of the rail is flush with that box we're gluing it onto. With the hunter-killer missile done, we can move on to the final step, the weapons. There's not much variation in how we magnetize the weapons. Each weapon consists of the weapon itself and an accessory, with only the heavy flamer and the plasma cannon being glued to their accessories. Hold off gluing these together for now. They're going to stick together better after we do the magnetization. Let's start by removing all the weapons and their accessories from the sprues. Perform any assembly that's required, remembering not to attach the plasma cannon or the heavy flamer to their accessories. For each of the weapons, snip off the rod and then use your hobby knife and a file to clean out the area. It might be a little tricky with the las cannon since there's a lot of excess material getting in the way. For the missile launcher, we'll drill a 3mm hole in the center of that spot where the rod used to be. You'll need to be delicate here to prevent the drill from drifting. Go ahead and add a magnet into that hole. For every other weapon, we're simply going to glue a 3mm magnet onto the spot where the rod used to be, centering it as best as we can. For each accessory, we're going to drill a 2mm hole into that square rod. In the case of the Heavy Flamer's fuel tank, there was already a small hole, which happened to not be centered. To ensure we have a centered pilot hole, we're going to widen this hole with a hobby knife, keeping the edge pointed towards the opposing side of the block. Once we're done drilling, go ahead and add a 2mm magnet to each of those holes. For the plasma cannon Heavy Flamer, making sure to only do one weapon at a time, apply glue as you normally would. Then attach both the weapon and the accessory to the Sentinel. Apply pressure as needed to ensure the weapon is securely attached to its accessory. At this point, all the weapons are magnetized and there's nothing left to do with our Sentinel except get any remaining accessories attached. And there you have it, one fully magnetized Sentinel. All you need now is to get a baggie to put all your extra bits in, and you're ready to take it for a game. Again, I didn't do a perfect job here, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. We've magnetized the Sentinel in such a way that we can run in any configuration we want, Scout or Armored. And because that torso can detach from the legs, it's really easy to pack. I hope you found this guide helpful, and I hope to create more guides in the future. If you did find this guide helpful, I'd appreciate it if you left me a like. And if there was anything that you thought could be improved, go ahead and leave a comment. Maybe that'll help someone else stumbling upon this guide in the future.